In this Cubase beginner tutorial for composers, I'll show you the key features of a popular DAW that some of Hollywood's most successful film composers use to craft their scores day in and day out. I've been using Cubase myself for over 20 years, so whether you're a beginner composer just getting started or switching from another program, I know from my students how overwhelming it can be to start learning a new DAW. We'll be breaking everything down so that you can get started making music right away. So let's get stuck in. Okay, so by default, the first thing that appears once you open Cubase is the Steinberg hub. Here you can open up some pre-made templates made by Steinberg, or open a recent project, or of course start from scratch. Let's start a blank project, so click on Create Empty down here. Let's take a look around the main interface. The project window is the main area where you'll probably spend most of your time, where you can see an overview of your music, as well as perform a whole host of editing functions. Down here we have the Transport panel. This is where you'll find functions such as Start, Stop and Record. This area is customizable, and you can also expand sections by clicking on these three vertical dots and dragging. There are also time displays detailing the position of your cursor. Here in bars and beats as well as timecode, along with other functions such as the overall project tempo and activating the metronome. Over here there are also the locators with fields for left and right selection. We'll come on to these more when exporting our music. Up here we have the project zone. This is where all of your MIDI and audio tracks and their data will live, along with the ruler, set to bars and beats at the moment, up here. Along the top is the project window toolbar, where you'll find tools and functions such as the object selection tool, draw tool, split and glue tools, the mute tool and line tool, which you'll make use of when working with the MIDI and audio regions within your project zone. There's also the option of changing the overall grid resolution and turning snap on and off. This is for keeping elements such as MIDI regions locked to the grid. Up here, there are also options for displaying the left and right zones, channel strip and lower zone. The left zone is useful for seeing parameters specific for each track, while the right zone has options for displaying loaded virtual instruments, browsing the media bay or displaying meters. Then the lower zone has even more functionality, with the option for displaying additional windows such as the mixer, MIDI editor or sampler controls. For navigating around the main project window, the zoom shortcuts of G to zoom out and H to zoom in are also useful. Okay, let's explore how to actually load up a virtual instrument track in order to start getting sound out of Cubase. Cubase comes with a selection of virtual instruments, although you may well have your own collection that you've already installed, such as Contact, Spitfire Audio's Labs, or Orchestral Tools Sign Player. So you can either go up to the project menu, then Add Track, then clicking on Instrument, or by right-clicking in the track area here and selecting Add Instrument Track. Both ways will bring you to the Add Instrument Track box, so here I'm going to choose Sign Player, and then click on Add Track. I want to load the free Helix Strings library from Orchestral Tools, so I'm just going to scroll down here to load it up. Once you've loaded a sound, you can then close the instrument window and it will still be loaded onto the track. To access the graphical interface of the instrument later on, you can click on this small keyboard sign to bring it up. If you have a MIDI controller connected, as well as either headphones or monitors, with the track selected, when you play a key, you should hear a sound coming from your own virtual instrument, if you've loaded a patch. If you don't, head up to Studio and then Studio Setup, where you'll be able to find settings related to your audio interface and MIDI controller. So for each instrument or track you load, there is a track header. Here you can perform tasks such as renaming a track, so simply double-click on the track name and type a new one. Within the track header, there's also options such as mute or soloing the track. There are a couple of methods for recording MIDI information into Cubase. The first uses the more traditional record button down here on the Transport panel. With record enabled on the MIDI track, hit the record button, and if you have the pre-count button on down here, you'll hear 8 clicks as a pre-count in, before then seeing the playhead begin to move. You'll probably also want to make sure the metronome is enabled, so your playing lines up with the grid. Either press this button down here on the Transport panel, or press the shortcut C. When you've finished recording, simply press stop or hit spacebar. Any notes or additional MIDI data you play in on your controller will appear here in a block called a MIDI region. You can then play back, moving the cursor back to the beginning by clicking up here in the ruler and dragging back to the left, and then pressing play or spacebar. The second way of recording is something that I use all the time: retrospective recording. This allows you to capture or record the MIDI data you played on your controller, even if you weren't actually recording. It's been invaluable when I've been improvising and wanted to capture a small idea in 5 minutes of playing. You don't even have to be in playback for Cubase to capture your MIDI notes either. To demonstrate the function, I'm just going to load up another virtual instrument, a harp. So to use the retrospective record function, simply play something in. I'm going to press play just so I'm playing in time with the grid. Once you're done, then head up to the transport menu, select MIDI retrospective recording, and then insert from all MIDI inputs. You'll see Cubase has captured the notes that you played in. I've also assigned my own key command, R, by going over to Edit and then Key Commands, before searching for retrospective recording and then reassigning. Now we have 2 virtual instrument tracks with MIDI data. Let's explore how we can edit and even add MIDI data manually. Firstly, we can make broad edits right here in the project window. Using the tools available up on the toolbar, we can cut a region into 2 by selecting the split tool up here, or by pressing 3, before then clicking on the region. Then we could delete, say, the first region. So to do that, firstly make sure it's selected by heading up to the Object Selection tool, or by pressing 1 on your keyboard, and then clicking the region you want to delete, before then simply pressing your Delete key. Alternatively, we could glue 2 regions together by selecting the Glue tool up here, and then clicking on the left-hand region. If you wanted to mute the region, select the Mute tool, or by pressing 7, before then clicking on the specific region that you want to silence. Up here is where you can also change the colour of a selected track. For more fine-tuned editing, such as editing individual MIDI notes or MIDI controller data, we'll need to make use of Cubase's key or MIDI editor. Firstly, make sure the Object Selection tool is selected by pressing 1, then double-click on the MIDI region you want to edit. You may find that the editor either opens up in the lower zone, or depending on your set preferences, will open up in a separate window. You can see the notes are represented graphically by these bars. Firstly, I like to see the pitches on each bar. If you can't see that on yours, head over to this vertical zoom control, where zooming in will display the pitches. So in the key editor, you can move notes around freely with the mouse, both side to side representing time, but also up and down, which changes the pitch. Let's first concentrate on refining the timing of these notes though. You can see that the notes I played in are generally behind the grid. We'll use Cubase's quantize functions to help correct these. Quantizing means to move events so that they are positioned on the nearest grid line. In one action, we can pretty much correct all of the MIDI that is selected, which can help save time if you were to move each note manually. So firstly, select some notes by either pressing 1 for the Object Selection tool, and then either clicking in a blank space and dragging so that the Selection tool encompasses your notes, or by using the shortcut Command or Control plus A. Then set the smallest or quickest note value you have. You want to work out the right setting here, as quantizing can mess up the timing, pulling notes too far in either direction. Next, head up to the Edit menu, and then Quantize, or use the shortcut Q. You should see all the notes jump and lock to the nearest grid position. You can take a listen to the MIDI by either clicking up here on the ruler to move the playhead to a new location, before then pressing spacebar to play, or you can also bring up the transport panel by pressing F2, where you'll see the familiar controls for playback. Let's next take a quick look at how you can manually draw notes in, which can be useful if you don't have a MIDI controller. Like a lot of tasks in Cubase, there are multiple ways. Firstly, you can simply double-click to enter a note. By clicking and letting go straight away, you'll add a note with a length determined by the quantized value set up on the toolbar. By double-clicking and then dragging to the right, you then have more control over the actual note length. You can also add notes using the draw tool up here on the toolbar, or by pressing the shortcut 8, then clicking the main area to draw a pitch in. If you want your notes to snap to Cubase's grid, make sure that the snap tool is activated by clicking up here on the toolbar or by using the shortcut J. You can also resize notes by making sure you have the object selection tool activated by pressing 1, clicking on the note, then hovering your mouse at either end of the note. You'll see the double-headed arrow appear, which you can then go ahead and resize with. Cubase will also let you change the pitch simply by using your up and down arrow keys on your keyboard as well. Copy and pasting notes is also pretty straightforward. Firstly, select a group of notes. Again, using the object selection tool by pressing 1, then clicking and dragging to select. Then either head up to Edit, Copy, or use the shortcut Ctrl or Command plus C. Then move your playhead by either clicking up on the ruler at your desired location, or by typing in a numeric value in the transport panel. Remember, if you don't have your transport panel showing in the key editor, you can activate it by pressing F2 or heading up to the transport menu and selecting Transport Panel. Then simply use Ctrl or Command plus V to paste, or head up to the Edit menu and select Paste. Your copied notes will then appear at the location of your playhead. If you want to duplicate a note or group of notes, simply select some MIDI and then head to the Edit menu, down to Functions, then Duplicate, or press Command or Ctrl plus D. An essential part of a composer's toolkit for producing great sounding mockups is making use of MIDI continuous controllers, in order to add dynamics and musicality to your samples, such as sustained or legato patches. One of the advantages that Cubase has over other DAWs is its ability to display multiple controller lanes at once. We often want to be adding modulation, CC1, and expression, CC11 data, in order to make use of dynamic crossfades with orchestral sample libraries, along with adding small dynamic variations. So going back into the long string notes I recorded earlier, right now you can see that only the note's velocities are viewable. You can change the lane from velocity to something like modulation by simply clicking where it says velocity and then selecting modulation. To add an additional lane, you can simply then click the plus icon down here to add, say, an expression lane. To draw in some Midi CC data, first make sure that Snap is turned off, clicking this button up here or the shortcut of J. Then select the pencil tool, again using the shortcut 8 to draw in the data freehand. For a more refined shape, like a smooth curve, head over to the line tool and then click and hold, until you see options such as the parabola. Now you can draw in smooth natural dynamic curves by clicking to the left and then dragging over to the right. Midi CC data can also be tweaked, firstly by selecting, using Command or Ctrl plus A, and then changing to the Object Selection tool and moving your mouse up to the top center of the selection area. Clicking on this middle square will enable you to scale the data vertically, an easy way of adjusting the volume and timbre of your sampled instrument when applying this to both expression and modulation data. While adding Midi CC data can help add dynamics and musicality to sampled instruments which are longer in nature, for shorter articulations such as percussion hits or spiccato string patches, adding variation to each note's velocity is essential for creating realism. Let's open up the heart part which I recorded. A note's velocity can then be changed by bringing your cursor into the velocity lane, where a pencil now appears, and then clicking to change the height of each vertical bar. You can alter the velocities of a selection of notes by again selecting them all, and then by clicking on the middle square up here. The velocities can then be scaled together. Velocities can also be compressed or expanded by moving over to the square on the right-hand side of the selection. Additional functions, such as limiting velocities or adding an automatic degree of variance, can also be achieved to a selection by heading up to the MIDI menu, heading to Functions, and then selecting Velocity. Okay, let's next take a quick look at how you can work with audio within Cubase. Firstly, you can import audio files into Cubase by going to the File menu, Import, then Audio File, or simply by dragging straight from the Mac Finder or Windows Explorer. Once you've chosen an audio file, you'll then be presented with some import options, such as changing the sample rate to match your project. Then pressing OK will import the audio file. Here I've got a boom sound, so Cubase will automatically create an audio track, placing the audio file at the current playhead location. You can of course move the audio region around and even resize it like you would normally do with MIDI regions. You can make quick edits like transposing the audio by making sure the audio file is selected and then going up here to the transpose control. Say I want to shift this boom sound up an octave. I can simply type in +12 and then enter. To quickly change the overall gain of an audio region, from Cubase 14, you can now click in the bottom left-hand corner over this triangle to bring up a quick fader control for that region. If you want to record audio in, you firstly need to create an audio track. Head up to Project, Add Track, and then Audio. Or of course you can right-click below the track area and click on Add Audio Track. The Add Track dialog box will appear, where you can select options such as mono or stereo. Click Add Track, and your track will then appear. You'll need to make sure that your input routing options are set up properly. You can always configure these up in the Studio menu and then Audio Connections, before then making sure the right input is selected in the track inspector here. I've got my mic connected, so you can see the input meter being activated as I'm speaking. Then to record the incoming audio, you can simply move your playback cursor to your chosen location, press the record button on the transport panel, and away you go. And it's that easy to record audio into Cubase. When you're done, just press the stop button. You'll then be able to see the waveform in the track. You can also adjust the vertical zoom of this by heading up here. You can also perform some extra functions with audio regions that you can't with MIDI regions. If I zoom in here, firstly by hovering your mouse over the far right or left side of the region, these small nodes appear towards the top. Clicking and then dragging these enables you to draw in fade outs or fade ins easily. Other functions that can be applied to audio regions include reversing and time stretching. These and various other functions can be used by selecting an audio region, then heading up to the Audio menu and Processes, where you'll see a list of other options. Cubase also has a streamlined way of quickly converting MIDI to audio. Handy if you want to take advantage of functions such as reversing audio. So firstly, select the MIDI region you want to convert, then head up to Edit, Render in Place, then Render with current settings. Cubase will quickly render that MIDI into an audio region below. So moving on, I'm just going to delete these audio tracks that I've created. To remove, I can right-click on each track in the track header and click on Remove Selected Tracks. Let's take a quick look at some of the mixer settings now. There are a few ways to view channel strip settings for a track. Firstly, you can use the channel strip area to the left of the track inspector. Make sure you have this display option on if you don't already see it. You can also open the mixer in the lower zone. Again by clicking up here on Show Lower Zone and then making sure Mix Console is selected down here. Finally, you can also bring up the main mixer console page, going up to Studio and then Mix Console, or by pressing the F3 shortcut. So let's take a look at some of the basic mixer functions. So starting at the top for each channel, there is an EQ control for filtering out, cutting or boosting frequencies. When you click in this area, up pops an expanded section where you can then fine-tune EQ adjustments. Next, there are then some basic routing options, where you can select audio or MIDI inputs along with the output bus. Below that is the Insert Plugin slot. These are for effects such as compressors or additional filters that you may want to add to alter the sound of an instrument or channel. Next, we have the Send Effects slot. For a send bus to show here, you'll need to first add a bus, such as an effects track, which you can do by going up to Project, Add Track, Effect. Once you've loaded a plugin, like this reverb here, you'll then see the send appear in this area. You can then turn on the send effect by clicking this power button, with control over how much signal is sent to the send as well. Moving down, there are then mute and solo options, before then having your panning control for the track. Next we have the main volume fader for the instrument or track, with the read and write enable buttons below, which are used for programming in mix parameter automation. Say you wanted to record in some panning automation for an instrument track. Firstly, make sure to activate write mode by clicking on the W. Then press play and move the panning control, or other parameters such as the main fader. When you're done, deactivate write mode by clicking on the W again. The green R for read mode should still be activated, meaning that Cubase will then play back the automation. When automation data has been recorded, you'll see an automation lane appear for the recorded parameter under the track in the project window. Here, using tools such as the pencil tool, here you can tweak and refine the automation further. To select other parameters, simply head up to here, and once clicked, you'll see lots of other parameters that are available to be automated for that channel. You'll also need to access the master channel, where you might want to add effects such as a limiter. The master channel has the same appearance as other tracks or channels, but is the most right-hand channel on the mixer. Next, let's move on to how, as a film, TV or video game composer, you can work with video in Cubase, along with some extra functionality including the use of markers and the tempo track. So to bring a video into Cubase, simply go over to the File menu, Import, then Video File. Navigate within the Mac Finder or Windows Explorer to find the video that you want to bring in, and then click Open. Cubase has imported the audio file of the video as well. As there is no sound effects or dialogue for this particular video, I'm just going to delete this. I'm also just going to move the video track up to the top here by clicking on the track and dragging up. You can see the video up here, although with a warning about the video's frame rate and Cubase's project frame rate not matching. To fix that, head over to the Project menu and then down to Project Setup. Here you can change parameters such as the project frame rate. I want the project frame rate to be 30 frames per second, the same as the video, so I can change that here. Click OK and all should be good. To display the video window, head up to Studio and then click on Video Player, or alternatively use the shortcut F8. When you press spacebar or play on the transport panel, your video should start playing, along with of course any MIDI or audio regions you have as well. When writing to picture, there will often be moments which you need to hit or comment on musically. To help identify these moments, we can use markers. So first, you'll want to load up a marker track. Head up to the Project menu, Add Track, and then select Marker. Or again, right-click under the track list and click on Add Marker Track. Give your marker track a name, and then click Add Track. You may find it useful to scroll through the video by clicking and dragging the playhead up in the ruler until you find a significant moment visually in the video. Once you have a location, you can simply head up to the marker track header and click on Add Position Marker. You can give the marker a description by then clicking on it so it's selected, and then heading up to the top where you can double-click to add a description. To help align your music with the on-screen events and markers, you'll probably find that you want to fine-tune the tempo or have the option of using additional time signatures or meters. You can do that by adding both tempo and time signature tracks. So head up to Project and then Add Track to add both the signature and tempo tracks. To edit the tempo track, firstly let's just increase the height a little by clicking on the bottom line here and dragging down. Now we can firstly adjust the overall tempo by moving this first node up and down. But you can also add tempo changes by clicking on the tempo line where the pencil will automatically appear and then dragging up or down. Cubase has added an abrupt tempo change. Now if I just undo this using Ctrl or Command plus Z and then change this from step to ramp, when I perform the same adjustment this time, Cubase will make a gradual tempo curve instead. When modifying the tempo, look at what happens to the marker that we originally placed. It's staying at the same bars and beats location, even though I'm changing the tempo. It's going to be out of sync with the specific place in the video we originally placed it. This is because the marker track is set to what's called a musical time base. The marker will stay at the current bars and beats position, even if the tempo shifts. So I'm just going to manually move the marker back to the cut of when we see the new planet. To keep a marker lined up with a specific spot on a video, we need to change it to a linear time base, so that it maintains its minutes and seconds location. So to do this, simply click the icon of a quarter note on the marker track, and it will then change to a linear time base. Now when I change the tempo, the marker will keep its minutes and seconds position. Finally, to further help in hitting specific points in a video, you may want to make use of different time signatures or meters. A new meter can be added simply by bringing up the draw tool and clicking at the beginning of a bar on the signature track. Here you can type in a new meter such as 6/4 followed by enter. Now I've got a basic tempo map. Here's the short piece I've written to accompany the video. Let's next go into some more features that composers in particular can make use of within Cubase. Cubase also features some tools which make it easier to manage projects with large track counts, like composer templates. One of my favourite features is folder tracks, essentially containers you can use to organise tracks that are similar in nature, for example strings or brass. To add a folder track, go up to Project and then Add Track, then select Folder. Give it a quick name and then click Add Track. Now you can drag existing tracks onto the folder track and they will then be nested inside. Once you have multiple tracks inside a folder, you can then perform tasks like showing and hiding all of the tracks by clicking on the Expand Folder icon. You can also easily solo or mute all of the tracks within a folder in one go. Cubase also has some really great track visibility functionality, which you can use to filter out tracks that you don't necessarily need to see at any given moment. Head over to the Visibility tab in the left zone, and then by right-clicking in this area, you have numerous options such as only show tracks with actual data on them, or show tracks which have data at the cursor position. Only showing tracks with data between the locators is also incredibly useful, particularly when you're in the final stages such as exporting your music. There's also a small but mighty function called Find Tracks. You can click this small icon here, or use the shortcut Command or Ctrl+F. Now you can type in the name of a track, hit enter, and Cubase will automatically take you to the track you want. Cubase's expression maps is a handy way to manage working with multiple articulations, especially compared to working with one articulation or technique per track. Now, although having each articulation on a separate track is my preferred way of working, lots of composers make use of Cubase's expression maps, which enable you to have multiple articulations on a single track. Take something like Spitfire Audio's chamber strings. Here in the cello patch inside Contact, there are 9 different articulations or techniques which you can move between. The default method of changing articulations is to use key switches. Here you can see the red keys. When I press the lowest key, C-2, that would be selecting the first articulation legato, while another note such as D♯2 selects staccato, or E-2 for changing to pizzicato. It can be a pain to remember different key switches, especially as these vary significantly between different sample libraries. So to load an expression map onto a track, head over to the Expression Map tab in the Track Inspector for that particular track. If you don't see the tab, you may have to right-click in a blank space within the inspector, then go to Setup Sections, and then make sure Expression Map is selected. Then add an expression map by clicking on this arrow where you have the option of selecting an existing map or creating a new one. I've built one for the chamber strings cello, so I have this one here. Here in the MIDI editor, once you've initially set up the expression map for a particular patch or instrument, firstly bring up the articulation lane by clicking on an existing controller lane and then selecting Articulations and Dynamics. You can then select different articulations by drawing in triggers down here, in line with the relevant articulation or playing technique. Expression maps take a little bit of effort to get setting up beforehand, and involve going into the expression map builder. But once you get used to the workflow, expression maps can make the process of working with multiple articulations much easier. Search for Articulation Map Setup for Cubase here on YouTube. There are a great few tutorials which go into detail about setting up a map. When working with orchestral sample libraries, there is often a delay between the note being triggered by MIDI and when you actually hear the sound. Often due to the physics of playing the instrument, sample library developers want to achieve as much realism by capturing, for example, the digging in of the bow in a short string patch, or the initial attack of a woodwind instrument like a flute. Here's the cello from Performance Samples Pacific Solo Strings. You can see the notes are lined up on the grid, but when I play them, you'll hear that the notes are not audibly aligned to the grid. Here in Contact, the patch suggests to have an offset of 180 milliseconds, meaning Cubase should trigger the note 180 milliseconds earlier so that it lines up more with the grid. So to enter a track delay, go up into the track inspector, and then here you can double click and enter a negative number, in this case minus 180 milliseconds, to trigger the earlier playback of the samples. Let's take a listen. Now the notes sound much more in time with Cubase's grid. The composer David Cadell has put together a spreadsheet with the suggested negative track delay values for a whole host of well-known orchestral sample libraries. I'll link to the Google Sheet in the description below. The chord track is an area where you can add chords and scale information. Cubase has the ability to suggest a progression based on your previously chosen chords, or alternatively, it can be really handy to have a visual reminder of the harmony and chords you've already chosen while working on your arrangement. To add a chord track, either go up to Project, Add Track, and then Chord, or of course you can also right-click on the track list and select Add Chord Track. Cubase can also give you guidance on the scale you're using, though I like to turn this off here. I usually keep the chord track muted, as Cubase can play chords using whichever instrument or MIDI track you currently have selected. So to add chords manually, reach for the Draw tool, or using the shortcut of 8, then click where you would like to add them. An X will appear. Now reach for the Object Selection tool using the shortcut of 1, and then double click. You now have the option of selecting the chord you want, with the root note on the left-hand side, then type, any extensions, and then finally with any bass note or inversion options. So I'm just going to enter a few more here. Then heading over to the tab on the right-hand side will also bring up the Chord Assistant, with various options for helping you to choose chords and progressions. There is also a list of suitable progressions, a proximity view of chords which are related harmonically, along with using the circle of fifths. Once you have a chord progression, you can then drag these chords onto an instrument or MIDI track, and Cubase will populate the track with the correct MIDI notes. Cubase's logical and project logical editors are really powerful when it comes to manipulating MIDI and other project data. Although they may seem a little complicated for anyone starting out with Cubase, let's go over some of the basics of the MIDI logical editor, where we go through some of the benefits and ways that I use it. The logical editor can be found up in the MIDI menu. You can either apply an existing function or go into Setup to program a new process. The going into the programming behind each logical preset is beyond the scope of this beginner video, but I just want to show you some of the presets which I use all the time. The first preset I use often is increasing and decreasing selected velocities by a value of 10. You can see that when I hit apply, the velocities all increase. The same works with decreasing as well. You can assign each logical editor preset to a key command. Head over to Edit, Key Commands, and then search for Process Logical Preset, and then scroll until you find the relevant preset. Here I have the velocity +10 and -10 set to control +2 and 3. I've then programmed some buttons on my Stream Deck to trigger these key commands, in turn triggering the velocity transformation at a touch of a button. Next I have similar commands, but each for increasing and decreasing modulation or expression CC values. This is a handy and fast way to adjust the balance of an instrument or MIDI track within a piece. I've also got a preset which copies modulation data over to the expression name, which saves having to copy and paste information between lanes. Finally, I also have a preset which deletes any modulation or expression data. Handy if I want to draw or record some new Midi CC values in. I haven't even scratched the surface of the potential uses of the logical editors. Hopefully you can get an idea of how powerful they can be for speeding up your workflow when working with MIDI. Again, there are some great videos from other YouTubers which go into much more depth. See my links in the description below. And finally, one of the most important tasks you'll perform in Cubase is exporting your music or audio out of the program and into the world. You'll firstly need to set the locators, essentially a reference point to tell Cubase where you want your exported file to begin and end. You can set the locators down here on the transport panel, the left locator for where you want your track to start from, and the right for the ending. You can even type in the numeric values by double-clicking on each locator, or selecting by dragging to encompass all of the regions you want to include, before then pressing the shortcut P. You'll see that the ruler changes to a light grey colour, showing the area that the locators are set to. Next, go to File, Export, Audio Mixdown. Firstly, give your track a name, and then set the location of where you want to export the file to in Path. Moving down, you can then set the format you want to export to, so MP3 or WAV file for example, including the sample rate and bit depth. Then finally, just click on Export Audio. Cubase will render out your music to your chosen file format at your chosen location on your computer. So I hope that has helped if you're a composer looking to get started with writing music in Cubase. Now you've been through the basics, make sure to check out this video where I share 20 next level tips on getting even more out of the program. If you have any questions or comments, let me know below. Thanks for watching and hopefully see you in the next video.